Neue Zürcher Zeitung. Today we have the second candidate for the Tokyo governor elections, and because it is an election, I have to read a short statement to you. For all the journalists whose targeted audience is in Japan, please be aware of the Public Offices Election Act, Koshoku Senkyuho. We have no intention of favoring one candidate over another, and we are trying to invite as many candidates as possible, but there's a limit to what we can do. And another point of order, please make sure that your mobile phones are turned off and not disturbing us. Now to our guest today, Mr. Kenji Utsunomiya. He grew up quite far away from Tokyo in Ehime and Oita Prefecture, but he graduated from Tokyo University Law School, and from 2010 to 2012 he was the head of the Japan Bar Association. During the last elections for Tokyo governor in December 2012, he was already a candidate, and he came in second, although with quite a distance to Naoki Inose. After Naoki Inose stepped down, Mr. Utsunomiya was the first one to declare his candidacy, and he advocates, among other things, a nuclear-free Japan. He's backed by the Japan Communist Party, by the Social Democratic Party, and by two smaller parties who are not in the Diet, the Green Party and the New Socialist Party. Mr. Utsunomiya is going to give us a short outline of his program, and then we open to question and answers. Please give a warm welcome to Kenji Utsunomiya.
Hello everyone.
私はこの度東京都知事候補に立候補しています宇都宮健児と言います。どうかよろしくお願いします。
I've just been introduced. My name is Kenji Utsunomiya. I have announced my candidacy for the Tokyo gubernatorial election.
私は42年間、弁護士としてさまざまな社会問題に取り組んできた弁護士です。
I have spent 42 years working as a lawyer. I have been involved in many cases that involve society.
サラ金クレジット商工ローン、闇金融などの高利金融被害者を救済するために、一人一人の救済活動を行うとともに、こういうたかが借金のために、命を捨てる人がないように立法運動を行いました。
I have been involved in many cases where people were burdened by loans that were put together in an unscrupulous way. I have, for example, people have been involved in loans from shady characters or shady organizations. As a result, they've been saddled with multiple debts. I have worked very hard to try to solve each of these cases for each individual involved. I have also tried to work to further legislation that will prevent situations where people saddled with such terrible loans are pushed to commit suicide.
2006年にはサラ金クレジット等の小売金融業者の金利を大幅に引き下げ、グレーゾーン金利を撤廃する貸金業法の改正を成功させました。
For example, there have been several cases in Japan which are called the Saraki or credit-related scandals. These involved organizations that have used the discrepancies between existing laws to provide to offer very high interest rates. This is called the gray zone interest rates. As a result, we've been able to put forward a law that would eliminate or restrict the usage of such high interest loans.
今から19年前の3月20日、東京の地下鉄にサリンがまかれるサリン事件が発生しました。
Another case that I was involved in, you may remember that 19 years ago, on March 20th, there was an incident in the Tokyo metropolitan subway system where a deadly toxin sarin gas was released.
この地下鉄サリン事件で13人の方が尊い命をなくされ、6000人を超える人が負傷しております。
This was a terrible case where 13 people lost their lives and over 6,000 people were in some way injured or wounded.
私は何の罪のない犯罪の被害者の救済は国家がまず行うべきであると考えていますけど、当時我が国は地下鉄サリンの被害者に手を差し伸べませんでした。
I have a fundamental belief that I've had throughout my career, which is that when innocent people are victims of some kind of criminal activity or some kind of a terrible event, then the first person that should step in to help them should be the first entity that should step in to help them should be the national government. However, in regard to the victims of the sarin case, the national government did not offer any kind of rescue or help.
このため私は地下鉄サリン事件被害対策弁護団を立ち上げ、その団長に私が就任し、オウム真理教と対決をして、オウム真理教の破産申し立てをしました。
As a result, I worked together with colleagues who were lawyers, and we put together a team of lawyers that were dedicated to rescuing the victims of the sarin incident. As a result, I was elected to be the leader of this team, and I stood at the forefront of the activities to try to deal with the AUM religious organization. We were successful in eventually pushing OM to declare bankruptcy.
また、破産手続きだけでは被害者の救済が十分でなかったため、国に働きかけて2008年にオウム被害救済法を成立させました。
However, we realized that simply pushing the OM religious organization into bankruptcy was not enough to be able to rescue the victims of this terrible sarin attack. As a result, we pushed the government, national government, to move to help the victims, and as a result, we were able to have a law that was able to compensate the victims of the OM attack. This was in 2008.
2008年の秋にリーマンショックが発生し、世界的な金融恐慌となりました。
Also, in 2008, you may remember that this is when the Lehman shock occurred. As a result, we saw a tremendous damage arising throughout society.
その際、我が国では派遣労働者が大量に解雇されました。
One of the results of this Lehman shock and the resulting financial crisis was that many temporary dispatch workers lost their jobs.
解雇された派遣労働者の中には職を失うだけではなくて住まいを失って野事故を余儀なくされる派遣労働者が大量に発生しました。
This was a terrible development in part because many of the dispatch workers not only lost their employment, but they also lost as a result of their place of residence, their homes, a place to live, and as a result they were forced to live out in the open.
このため私たちは派遣切りをされた野事故を余儀なくされた派遣労働者を支援するために東京霞が関の日比谷公園に弁当村を設置して年末年始、派遣労働野事故を余儀なくされた派遣労働者の支援活動を行いました。
Therefore, as a result of trying to help these people who were forced basically to live out in the streets, we put together during the end of the year and beginning of the year period when there is really very little employment opportunities and when it's very, very cold, we put together in Hibiya Park the Hibiya Tent Village. This is in the Kasumigaseki governmental district.
この取り組みは我が国では年越し派遣村と呼ばれておりますけど、私はその年越し派遣村の名誉村長を務めました。
This tent village basically was temporary housing that was put together to house people at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, and I was elected to become the honorary mayor of this tent village.
2011年3月11日、東日本大震災と原発事故が発生したときは、私は日本弁護士連合会の会長でした。
When the East Japan earthquake and the nuclear accident in Fukushima occurred on March 11, 2011, I was at that time the chairman of the Japan Federation of Bar Associations.
私は直ちに震災発生したその時に、東日本大震災と原発事故の対策本部を立ち上げ、全国の3万人の弁護士、それから52の弁護士会と一緒になって、東日本大震災の被災者、原発事故の被害者の救済活動に当たりました。52弁護士会。
Excuse me. And as a result of my position, I immediately took actions after the earthquake and accident occurred. I put together countermeasures, a task force to deal with the after effects of the nuclear accident and the earthquake. I called upon the 30,000 lawyers who were working throughout Japan and the 52 bar associations, and immediately put together a system where we would be able to help the victims of these two accidents.
また被害者や被災者を支援するためにさまざまな立法活動を行いまして、また被害者救済のための新たな制度を提案し実現しました。
We were also very active in trying to put forth a legislation that would help rescue the victims of the earthquake and disaster and the people who had to evacuate from their homes. We also were very instrumental in proposing new systems that would help rescue or provide support to these victims.
私はこのような42年間にわたる弁護士経験を生かして都政を変えて都政を都民の皆さん一人一人にとって働きやすく暮らしやすい、そして希望が持てる街を作ろうと考えて知事選に立候補した次第です。
So it is on the basis of this 42-year career that I've had as a lawyer, this 42 years worth of experience that I've had, that I would now like to bring to the government of Tokyo. In other words, I would like to use my experiences to be able to help change the administration of the Tokyo government. I would like to help create a Tokyo government that extends a hand to each single individual citizen of Tokyo. I would like to be able to create a Tokyo in which people can find it easier to work in, easier to live in, where each person can feel hope for the future.
私は都知事選に向けて5つの基本政策と2つの特別政策を掲げて戦っております。
In regard to the upcoming election, I have set forth 5 fundamental or basic policies and 2 special policies as my campaign slogans.
基本政策の1つ目は東京を世界一働きやすく暮らしやすい希望が持てる街にするということであります。
The first of my fundamental policies is, as I've just described, I'd like to make Tokyo the city in which it is easiest to work, easiest to live in the world. And I would also like to create a Tokyo that is full of hope.
石原都政、猪瀬都政14年間の間に、東京都においては大幅に福祉予算が削減されてきております。
During the 14 years of the administration by Governor Ishihara and Governor Inose, we have seen that the budgets for welfare expenditures have dropped drastically.
この結果、特別養護老人ホームに入りたくても入れない高齢者が4万3000人を超えております。
As a result, there are some 43,000 elderly individuals who are waiting to get into special care nursing facilities. However, they are on a waiting list because there's not enough space.
また若いお父さんやお母さんが子供を預けて働きたくても預ける保育園が足りないために、保育園に入るのを待機している児童の数が東京都の発表でも8000人、私の試算では2万人近くなっております。
Also, in regard to daycare facilities for children, in other words, when young mothers and young fathers wish to work, they need to be able to have their children taken care of during the day. It is said that there are some 8,000 children. This is the official Tokyo City announcement that there are 8,000 children on a waiting list for daycare centers. However, I have made private estimates of my own, and I believe that the number is actually closer to 20,000.
さらに、石原都政、猪瀬都政14年間の間に都営住宅は一つも建設されていないために住まいの貧困の問題が深刻な問題になっております。
Again, over the past 14 years, especially under the reign of Mr. Ishihara, during that time there was not even one Tokyo metropolitan city public housing development made. In other words, no new housing buildings were built. Therefore, having a place to live is a great problem for many Tokyo people.
私はこのような問題を解決するために私が知事になりましたら特別養護老人ホームの建設を推進し、特別養護老人ホームに入れない高齢者をなくしていきます。
I intend to deal with these issues very resolutely in regard to the elderly people who are trying to get into special care nursing homes. I would like to further the construction of such facilities so that we will have no people on waiting lists.
また、保育園、質の高い保育園の建設を推進し、待機児童をなくします。
Also, I would like to move forward with creating more high-quality facilities for daycare centers, so that we will be able to again eliminate the waiting lists for children as well.
また住まいの貧困の問題を解決するために都営住宅の建設を開始します。
I also will move forward with the construction of public housing run by the city of Tokyo, so that we will be able to resolve this problem of people suffering from poverty in terms of housing accommodations.
また都内に75万戸存在する空き家を都が借り上げて公共住宅として都民に提供します。
Another thing that I intend to do is that we have some 750,000 housing residence facilities that are at present empty, being unused. I would like for the city of Tokyo to rent these, to take up and pay the rental for these houses or these condominiums or apartment rooms, etc., and provide them to the citizens of the city as public housing.
また低賃金の労働者であまり家賃を払えない人たちのために家賃補助制度を検討します。
Also, for people who are working but receive very low income, I would like to create some kind of a subsidy or support program to help them be able to afford housing.
雇用の問題は若い人たちにとって深刻な問題になっております。
I would also like to talk about this problem of employment. Being able to secure good employment is a crucial and serious problem for young persons.
日本の若者が将来に希望が持てなくなっています。
It is a sad truth that young people in Japan are no longer able to have much hope.
なかなか仕事が見つからない。見つかっても仕事は非正規雇用ばかりである。
It's very, very difficult for them to find jobs. Even if they are lucky enough to find jobs, they find that they are treated not as full-time workers, but as irregular workers or non-regular workers.
やっと正社員になったとしても長時間労働で過労死や過労自殺が多発しております。
And even if they are fortunate enough to somehow be employed as full-time employees, they find themselves confronted with having to work many, many long hours, great overtime hours, and as a result, we see an increase in the number of people who have died as a result of overwork.
さらにやっと有名な企業に就職できた若者も1、2年で若年労働者を使い捨てにするブラック企業の問題が昨年大きな社会問題になっております。
Also, I'm sure many of you have followed the news. One of the biggest topics last year was this new social problem where young people would find themselves being able to find a job as a regular employee in a fairly famous company, only to find that this company basically wanted to use them up in a year or two. In other words, these companies have no intention of nurturing these people for the long term, but just want to use them, the young people as quickly as possible. They're referred to as black companies.
このような状況を改善するために私が知事になりましたらブラック企業規制条例を作りまして東京都内からブラック企業をなくしていきます。
In order to deal with such situations, if I am elected governor, one of the first things that I will do is establish an ordinance that would restrict these black companies. In other words, black companies would not be able to function or operate in Tokyo.
過労死をなくすために長時間労働を規制する過労死防止条例を作ります。
In order to prevent people from dying from overwork, I would put together an ordinance that would forbid or prevent the people from dying from overwork.
基本政策の2つ目、首都圏直下型地震の際に都民の命を守るために防災対策、震災対策を進めます。
The second of my basic policies is to deal with the possibility of a huge earthquake occurring underneath the city, the epicenter being underneath the city. In order to be able to ensure that we will be able to protect the lives of our citizens, we will put together disaster prevention activities.
都内の建物の耐震化工事、木造家屋の不燃化工事を進めるために都が助成金を出して、この工事を推進します。
In the city, we have many large buildings. We will offer subsidies so that these buildings can be reinforced to withstand strong earthquakes. In regard to wooden homes, which we have many in Tokyo, we would offer subsidies so that people would be able to make their homes fireproof.
基本政策の3番目、原発の再稼働、原発輸出を認めず、原発のない社会を東京から作っていきます。
The third fundamental policy that I have is in regard to nuclear power plants. Fundamentally, I'm opposed to restarting nuclear power plants. I'm fundamentally against nuclear power plants in general. We want to start a movement from Tokyo that will spread throughout the nation to ensure that there are no nuclear facilities in the future.
私はこの脱原発というのは現に福島原発事故が起こっていますので、福島の原発の被害者の救済支援と同時に進めていきます。
In regard to this anti-nuclear power policy that we have, when we take into account the fact that the accident in Fukushima has already occurred and that there are victims and evacuees, as a result, I would like to combine this anti-nuclear power policy with an effort to try to save or rescue or support these victims and evacuees as well.
私の脱原発は合わせて子どもたちを放射線の被爆から守るための脱被爆対策を進めます。
This anti-nuclear policy will also be done in conjunction with an effort to try to protect children from the negative effects of radiation exposure. In other words, we will have radiation exposure prevention activities as well.
基本政策の4番目、いじめのない子どもたちが生き生きと学べる学校を作るために、教員に対する管理統制をやめさせます。
My fourth fundamental policy is to try to eliminate bullying in schools. In other words, to create school systems where children can feel vibrant and hopeful and happy. And in order to realize this, I'm going to change the way that teachers are currently managed, the way that they are managed and unified from above.
基本政策の5番目、安倍政権は集団的自衛権の行使を容認し、実質的に憲法9条を改憲して、アメリカと共に戦争をやる体制を作ろうとしております。
The fourth fundamental policy has to do with Prime Minister Abe's obvious intentions at present, which is to try to have Japan be able to exercise the right of collective defense. What he is doing right now is basically a de facto revision. He's trying to realize a de facto revision of Article 9 so that Japan will be able to engage in war alongside the forces of the United States.
私はこのような安倍政権の暴走をストップさせるため、憲法を守り、東京からアジアに向けて平和の発信をいたします。
I am determined to put a stop to the out of control activities, behavior of Prime Minister Abe. I will do my very best to be able to protect, defend the current constitution. I will do my best to ensure that Tokyo dispatches images or messages of peace toward Asia.
特別政策の1つ目、2020年に行われる東京オリンピックはシンプルで環境に配慮したオリンピック・パラリンピックにします。
In regard to my two special policies, the first special policy has to do with the 2020 Olympics. I'm going to ensure that this will be a simple Olympics, one that is very environmentally friendly, simple Olympics and Paralympics.
特別政策の2つ目、猪瀬前知事が受領した特集会からの5000万円のお金の問題を徹底的に究明して、金と利権から決別したクリーンな東京都政を作り上げます。
The second special policy that I have concerns the previous governor, Mr. Inose. He has been suspected of receiving 50 million yen from the medical-related organization, Tsukai. I intend to pursue the truth in this matter because I believe it is important for Tokyo politics, Tokyo administration, government administration to be able to separate itself from money politics and to become a clean government.
以上が私が掲げる5つの基本政策と2つの特別政策です。
So these are my 5 fundamental policies and my 2 special policies.
以上で私の話を終わらせていただきます。どうもありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Before we go into questions and answers, I realized I committed a terrible impoliteness. I forgot to introduce Takamatsu-san. I hope she forgives me because everybody knows her already. Now, questions, short as usual. One question per person, please. Who is first?
「国民新聞論説員の藤田と申します。今のお話の中でですね、その憲法を守ってということで、それは当然だと思うんですけども、例えばですね、東京にも離島といいますか、かなり南の方の島があります。で、中国はこの太平洋のかなり覇権をですね狙っておりまして、そういった島をですね取りに来るというと声があるかもしれませんが、そういう可能性も想定はできると思うんですね。で、そうした時に例えば東京都としてですね、そういう離島をですね、これハイポテティカルですけども、家庭の話ですから、どういうふうにそれを考えるんでしょうか。それは国の問題だとして、何もしなくていいのか、その辺のちょっと考えをですねお伺いしたいと思います。
I'm from the Kokumin Shimbun newspaper. My name is Fushida. I understand your fundamental position of wanting to protect or defend the current constitution, but could I give you a hypothetical example, truly a very hypothetical example? We know that Tokyo possesses many distant islands in the southern part of Japan. We know that at present China is beginning to expand its hegemony and is trying to expand its influence in larger parts of the ocean. So again, a hypothetical example, if China were to try to take some of these islands, what are your thoughts about this matter? I mean, would you do nothing, or should Tokyo do nothing? What are some of your impressions?
私は第二大戦前のように先進国が植民地を作って後進国を支配する時代は終わったと考えております。
I'd like to begin by saying that I think the era before World War II is something that has come to a close. And what I mean by that is that the era or age before World War II was an era in which we saw very advanced, highly industrialized nations of the world basically dominating the less developed nations of the world by colonizing them. I think that has come to a close.
それと同じように軍事力で領土の問題等を解決できる時代も終わったと考えています。
Along the same lines, I also feel that we have come to the end of an age or an era where a country can simply use a military force or military might to resolve territorial issues.
例えば日本と中国が軍事衝突が起こった場合に双方の国民が立ち上がれないほど決定的な壊滅的な打撃を受けてしまいます。
For example, if really hypothetically, if Japan and China were really to have some kind of a military confrontation, the extreme possibility might be that the people of both nations might never be able to recover from the potential damage that might occur.
私は基本的には外交で物事を解決するのが21世紀の物事の処理のやり方だと考えております。
What I'm saying is that these kinds of things are of the past. I believe that in the 21st century, issues between nations will be resolved through diplomacy.
ところが安倍政権ができて1年も経つのにお隣の中国、韓国との首脳会談が行われておりません。
Having said this, however, we see that Prime Minister Abe, even though he has been in power, his administration has been in power for a year, he still has not been able to realize a summit meeting with the leaders of China and South Korea, our next door neighbors.
さらには昨年12月の26日、靖国参拝をしまして、ますます中国と韓国との関係が悪化しております。
Not only that, on December 26th of last year, he visited Yasukuni Shrine, the controversial Yasukuni Shrine. As a result, he has worsened the relationship between Japan and China, Japan and South Korea.
私が知事になりましたら、ソウルと北京の市長に呼びかけて、 東京、北京、ソウルの平和都市会議を開催します。
If I'm elected governor of Tokyo, I will immediately contact the mayor of Seoul, the mayor of Beijing, and I would like to put together a conference between cities to discuss peace.
その自治体外交、政府がやれないことを自治体外交を通じてアジアにおいて平和的な環境を作っていきたいと考えております。
In other words, even though there are things that the national government may not be able to do, I think from the local autonomous government level, there are ways for us to be able to send messages of peace to our counterparts in Asia.
こういう努力は平和で友好的な祭典である2020年の東京オリンピックを成功裏に開催するためにも重要な活動だと位置づけております。
I also believe that these kinds of peace-based, amity-based efforts will very much ensure the success of the Olympics, because that, after all, is a festival, a celebration of peace and friendship.
我が国は1940年に東京オリンピック招致が決定されたんですけど、ご承知の通り1940年の東京オリンピックは日中戦争の拡大、1939年ヨーロッパにおける第二次世界大戦の火蓋が開けられた中で幻のオリンピックになっております。
I think many of you know that actually the Olympics were decided to come to Japan, Tokyo in 1940. However, this Tokyo Olympics in 1940 never was realized because, in part, the war between Japan and China began to escalate around that time, and also in 1939, World War II basically began in Europe.
安倍政権の今の政策は1940年のオリンピックの二の舞になりかねないような方向に突き進んでいると考えております。
I have some concern that the behavior, the actions of Prime Minister Abe and his administration may somehow invite a situation that is similar to what happened before the 1940 Tokyo Olympics.
Okay, Mark, please.
Michael Penna, the Shingetsu News Agency. We had Mr. Hosokawa here the other day, and I want to ask you basically the same question I asked him to see what your answer is. In your fundamental policies, there are several points that are quite similar to the Hosokawa candidacy. One of them is the anti-nuclear policy, which is his main theme. Another one is the environmentally friendly Olympics policy, and also the idea that the Abe administration needs to be stopped at this election. My question is, if these are such important policy goals, then how can they succeed if there are two major candidates who are basically representing this more liberal stream of thought? It seems to me that without more coordination or a unified candidacy between yourself and Mr. Hosokawa, you're going to be handing an easy victory to Mr. Masazoe. And so my question is, isn't it time for the liberal left to begin to come together a little bit in order to struggle against these trends that you don't like? If they don't come together, how can they succeed?
新月ニュースエージェンシーのベンと申します。先日細川候補もここにいらしたわけでございますので、私は聞いた質問、また同じ質問を宇都宮様にぶつけさせていただきます。その基本政策の中には非常にその細川氏と同じような内容が結構あるという感じがいたします。例えばその脱原発、彼はそれを一番のその優先事項としているわけでございますが、あるいはその環境に配慮したそのオリンピックを開催する、またその安倍首相の暴走にストップをかけるということでございますが、これは本当に重要なその課題ということでございましたら、その2人のその主要な候補者が同じようなものを訴えるのであれば、かえってお互いのその状況を不利にさせるのではないかという懸念があるんでございます。つまり、非常にその、似てるような政策を打ち出しているわけでございますが、非常にリベラルのようなその、政策におきまして、協力した方がより良いんじゃないでしょうか。もっとその例えば統一候補を出すっていうようなことの方がよろしいんじゃないでしょうか。でないとお互いがそのからその、 票を奪い合ってしまうために、かえって舛添候補が簡単にその選挙を勝つようなこういうような状況を生んでいるのではないでしょうか。
脱原発については私は細川候補と同じ方向を向いていると思います。ただそれ以外の政策が細川さんと一緒だというふうにはまず私は考えていません。それから一本化の問題は脱原発を進める市民グループから再三そういう要請がありましたので、私たちの陣営は細川さんと公開の討論会を開いてそういう問題について、一般の市民運動の皆さんに判断してもらいたいということで何回も公開討論会を呼びかけましたけど全く応じてもらえませんでした。それから細川さんの、問題は憲法の問題とかそれから集団的自衛権の行使の問題についてはこれまではあまり明確にされてなかったように感じます。それから細川さんを支援している小泉さんですけど、脱原発は小泉さんの発言を私は共感するんですけど、小泉さんが首相の時に日本の政策というのは規制緩和政策がずっと取られてきております。私たちはこれは新自由主義的市場原理主義的な政策だと。つまり、労働分野の規制緩和が進んだために非正規労働者が増えています。でその、結果先ほどお話ししましたようなリーマンショックの後派遣労働者が、大量に解雇され、そして住まいも失って野宿を余儀なくされた。でこういう小泉さんの政策を踏襲されている可能性があります。だから細川さんの手では貧困と格差は解決できないと考えております。また特別政策の、2番目の東さんの金の問題です。これは私は極めて都政にとっても重要な課題であると考えております。なぜかと言いますと、東さんに5000万円を渡した特集会という医療法人に対して東京都は過去9億円の補助金を出しております。許認可権限を持っている。そうですか。すみません。途中で。
Yes. In regard to the anti-nuclear policy, certainly I believe that Mr. Hosokawa and I stand in a very similar position. In other words, the direction that he faces is very much the direction that I face. But in regard to other policies that I have been pushing forward, I really do not necessarily think that we are thinking along the same lines. In regard to your suggestion that perhaps we might unify our positions and maybe perhaps have a single candidate, and of course I understand that this is something that's been proposed by many civic groups or citizens groups. We have certainly tried to respond to this by proposing to the Hosokawa team that the two candidates have some kind of a public debate so that the citizens groups can make a judgment for themselves. We have made repeated requests to the Hosokawa side to have this public debate. However, we have been rebuffed. In regard to other issues that I have presented, for example, about collective defense, the issue of defending the Constitution, etc., Mr. Hosokawa has not necessarily clarified his stance on these issues. Also, I would like to point out that the strongest supporter for Mr. Hosokawa is former Prime Minister Koizumi. And in regard to the utterances that Mr. Koizumi has made about getting away from nuclear power, I certainly agree with many of these comments. However, I would also like to point out that when Mr. Koizumi was Prime Minister, he was at the forefront of efforts to move forward with deregulation. In other words, he believed in what is called now neoliberalism, in market fundamentalism. But it is because of these deregulation activities that he moved forward with that eventually led to the creation of so many irregular or non-regular workers. And it was this situation that led to the firing of many of these non-regular workers after the Lehman shock. In other words, the situation that I described earlier, where these temporary workers or non-regular workers were dismissed in great numbers, led to many of them losing their homes and basically having to live out in the streets. So there is a danger that we are very cautious about the fact that Mr. Hosokawa might very much follow along the lines of Mr. Koizumi in these areas as well. So I believe that Mr. Koizumi's ideas cannot resolve the problems that we see of battling poverty or battling wealth disparity. Another issue in which I have some concerns in regard to Mr. Hosokawa is that, and this goes back to my second special policy, which has to do with Mr. Inose. I believe it is an important issue to pursue the truth in regard to what happened with Mr. Inose. The reason is that the medical association, medical group, the Tokusu group, received some 900 million yen over the years from the government of Tokyo in terms of special subsidies.
そういう東京都が9億円もの補助金を出している、私たちの税金をつぎ込んでいる、集会から5000万も供与を受けたというのは、これはやはり都政にとっても重大な問題で、徹底的に解明しなきゃいけない課題だと思っております。で、やはり東京都都政を金取り権から決別したですね、クリーンな都政を作るということが今都民が、最も求めていることの一つだと思います。こういう問題について細川さんは十分な取り組みができるかどうかやや疑問に思っております。
So again, the Tokyo City Metropolitan Government has extended subsidies amounting to about 900 million yen over the years, and considering that this group, which received taxpayers' monies, gave 50 million or offered 50 million yen to Mr. Inose, the governor, is, I think, a huge problem for the government of Tokyo. I believe that the people of Tokyo sincerely want Tokyo government, Tokyo politics to be severed from money politics. So in regard to these kinds of issues that I've described, Mr. Hosokawa has not really made any clear positions, and whether or not he would have the resolve and ability to pursue these issues is something that I feel some anxiety about, concern about.
Nichi Futsu Kyōdōテレビフランス店の及川と申します。すべての候補者、昨日も細川さんに伺ったのですが、いわゆる有害図書規制や、夜の1時以降にクラブが開けない、ダンスをすることを規制する、それを破ったクラブに対しては摘発ということが行われておりますが、大変ヨーロッパの人というのは明け方まで踊る習慣がございまして、大変評判がよろしくないので、ダンス規制と有害図書の規制に対してどのようなお立場でいらっしゃるか、ご説明いただければと思います。以上です。
I actually have asked this same question also to all of the candidates, and I asked this of Mr. Hosokawa the other day. Tokyo City has ordinances, restrictions about the display or use of what are called harmful reading materials, questionable reading materials, things of controversial or sexual nature. And secondly, in regard to the restrictions placed on dancing in public venues. For example, dancing can only occur till 1 a.m. For people coming from Europe people who come from some countries where people dance until dawn, these are considered rather unpleasant or troublesome directives or restrictions. What do you think about these restrictions?
表現の自由を侵害するという意味で、ダンス規制や有害図書規制には反対しております。
In regard to the freedom of expression that is guaranteed by the Constitution, in regard to restrictions on dancing and what are called harmful reading materials, from the point of view of defending freedom of expression, I'm against these restrictions.
民主主義社会において非常に重要な基本的な人権というのは出版、表現、集会結社、表現の自由ではないかと思っております。
In other words, I think the fundamental rights that are important for a democratic society is to ensure the freedom of publication, the freedom of association, the freedom of expression.
我が国の憲法21条でも集会結社表現の自由が基本的人権として保障されております。
In fact, in our Constitution, in Article 21, it is clearly stated that freedom of association, freedom of expression are guaranteed as fundamental basic human rights.
ところがこのところの政府の動向というのはこの辺の集会としや表現の自由を制限する方向に強く動いております。
But as you are aware, the national government's tendencies in recent months is to try to restrict these fundamental human rights of freedom of association, freedom of expression.
象徴的なのは昨年末多くの国民の反対を仕切って強行採決された特定秘密保護法です。
I think symbolic of this new trend by the national government is the passage in December of last year of the new designated secrets bill, which was opposed by many people and yet was basically steamrolled through the Diet.
そういう面で私はそういう傾向を憂えてますし、そういう表現、集会結社表現の自由を制限する動きには断固反対しております。そういう観点から、ダンス規制や有害図書規制にも反対しております。
I am, as I had implied earlier, very much worried, concerned about this trend or this new direction that is being taken by the government. So again, from a fundamental viewpoint of defending basic human rights, which include the freedom of association, the freedom of expression, from that point of view, I am against restricting dance activities or what are called harmful reading materials.
Okay, next. Maybe I add a question here. You have a huge experience as a lawyer, and when we hear you talking, your arguments are very legal. Politics is different business. How can you make up for that? Your experience is in legal affairs and not in politics.
私の方から質問させていただきます。先ほどご説明いただきましたように、弁護士、といたしまして本当に長い経験、豊富な経験を有している、というのがよくわかるんでございます。そして例えば何か反論されますとき、何かを説明するとき、その弁護士として、法的な、観点から非常に説得力あるようなご説明、お話っていうのができる方だというのがよくわかるんでございます。しかしながら政治といいますのは、また法務とは全然別世界ではないかというふうに思うんでございます。そのギャップをどのように埋めるというふうにお考えでございますでしょうか。そのギャップというのか、その差をどうやって乗り越えると思いますでしょうか。
私がやってきた弁護士としての活動は一般の弁護士と少し違っている面があるかと思います。一般の弁護士は個別の依頼者の依頼を受けてその事件を解決する、これが中心になっております。ただたまたま私が取り組んだ事件が社会的な事件だったので、私はそういう相談に来た個別の事件、例えば、借金を抱えた多重債務者の救済をもちろんやってるわけですけど、弁護士事務所とか弁護士会に相談に来れない何百万人もの多重債務者を救済するためには法律を変える必要があるということで、30年間にわたってずっとさまざまな法律を作ってまいりました。法律はご承知の通り、国会で過半数の賛成がなければ法律は通りません。したがって法律を作る場合のロビー活動は野党だけではダメなんです。与党も説得しなきゃいけない。で、ほとんど私が、作った法律の当時の与党は自民党や公明党でした。だから自民党公明党の議員も説得をして過半数の、支持を得て先ほど説明した、2006年の画期的な貸金業務の改正ができているわけです。オウム真理教の問題についても、ただ破産申し立てをするだけではなくて、最終的に破産手続きで救済されなかった分を国家が保障すべきだということで、国に働きかけて、オウム被害救済法というのを2008年に成立させております。これもロビー活動で、多くは与党の議員を説得して、こういう活動をやっています。この活動そのものがある意味では政治的活動ではないかと。そういう、知事になりましたら当然いろんな条例を作る、等々についても都議会の協力は得なきゃいけない。当然それは今の多数の、政党というのは自民党と公明党ですので、私はこれまでの経験からちゃんと道理と事実と道理に基づいて説得すればですね、自民党の都議会議員や公明党の都議会議員も都民のためになるなら必ず賛成していただける、そういうこれまでの40年以上の経験からそういう確信を持っております。
I would like to explain that although I have been working as a lawyer for many, many years, my experience as a lawyer differs from that of perhaps other lawyers. What I mean by this is that most lawyers, basically, they have an office or they have some kind of an official position, and individual people come to them with problems and ask them to take on a case, and the lawyer works on that case, and that is ended. However, in my career, I have had the opportunity, perhaps fortuitously, to be involved not just simply on individual cases, but to work on larger social issues. What I mean by that is that, of course, I have received requests from individuals to help them fight a case where they have, for example, been involved in been a victim of organization or company that charge exorbitant interest rates, or they have been saddled with multiple debts, etc. But many of the issues that I've been involved with go beyond simple one-by-one court cases. In other words, when you have millions of people who have been victimized by these high interest rate loans or who have been saddled with these multiple debt situations, then it's not enough to fight each of these cases in a court, but rather to push for a reform or a revision of a fundamental law. And in order to do this, it is not enough. These individual bar associations, individual law firms cannot take on these kinds of cases. So for what I've been able to do is that I've been able, as I mentioned earlier, to see the passage of two revisions or two laws. One is the very dramatic law in 2006, which is actually a revision of the financial, so the interpreter doesn't know the exact translation, which is the Kashikin-gyo, which is the law or act that supervises the lending business of financial companies. In 2006, we were able to see a huge revision of this to protect future victims. But in order to see the passage of law or the changing of revision of an existing law, what you need to have in the Diet is you need to have a majority of the Diet members vote for this passage. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that you cannot simply get the support of the opposition parties. You must be able to speak with and convince and persuade members of the ruling parties. I was also able, as I mentioned earlier, to see the passage of a law after the sarin accident. And I felt it was important, as I said earlier, to have the national government provide compensation to the victims of this terrible sarin attack. Therefore, in 2008, we saw the passage of a law which would compensate the victims of the own religious organization. And again, for both of these, this law and the revision of the 2006 law, I needed to be able to have the cooperation and understanding of the ruling parties. And the ruling parties in both cases were the LDP and the Komeito. What I'm trying to explain to you, therefore, is that in the future, if I'm elected the governor, I will have to pass many new directives or ordinances for the city of Tokyo. In order to do this, we will have to have the cooperation of Tokyo Assembly members, the majority of whom belong to the LDP or Komeito. But I have had the experience over the past decades to speak with and persuade and convince these ruling party members to support policies if, in this case, it would help the citizens of Tokyo. So although I have experience in the legal field, as a lawyer, I think I can also say that I've had great political experience as well.
Okay, we have time for another question. Please, here.デューク石川です。フリーランス。先ほどのマイケルの質問を受けたものなんですが、我々日本人は、小泉の5年半で、社会が壊されたことは重々承知しています。それに対する宇都宮さんのこだわりも分かります。しかし選挙の場合はやっぱり勝たなければやっぱり意味がないと思うんですね。で、今客観的な情勢を分析すると、1人か2人は宇都宮さんの上に得用する方がいらっしゃるという分析になっています。そういう状況でもし2人が、チームを組むことでもし勝てればその後で、都営運営の中で、それぞれの意見の違いを寄せることができると思うんですね。で、それで今回はこれは一、
都知事の選挙でなくて、我々の受け止め方は国政ですので、その辺をもう一度考えてみていただくことはどうかというのは私の質問です。ありがとうございます。
I'm a freelancer and my name is Duke Ishikawa. I would like to follow on the question that was presented by Mr. Ben a few moments ago. I certainly understand what you were saying about the fact that over the 5.5 years when Mr. Koizumi was in power, he basically destroyed Japanese society. I understand your strong feelings in this regard. However, we are faced with an election and one must probably take a practical approach. In other words, the most important point in an election is try to win the election. And if we look at the trend of votes from a very objective point of view, the analysis seems to be that there are several candidates that seem to be gaining more votes than you. So, from a practical point of view, it might be better if you might join forces, create a team, and once you create a team and once you win, you might be able, I believe, to resolve your differences of opinions. I believe that we, people in Japan in the city of Tokyo, are looking at this not simply as just one local election for the governorship of Tokyo, but of its ramifications for the politics or the direction of the entire nation.
細川さんとの一本化に関する問題については先ほどの同様な質問がありましたので、その答えと同じです。それから今の選挙情勢の見方については今ご質問の方と私はちょっと違っています。1年の前に私も出ましたけど、その時の手応えと今の手応えは全く違っています。段違いに反応が良くなっています。で、我々の考え方としてはこの選挙は勝てる可能性があると見ています。そういう見方ですので、そういう選挙情勢の見方も若干私は違う見方をしております。
So in regard to perhaps unifying the two candidates, myself and Mr. Sakawa, I think I've already answered this question previously, and so that is my fundamental answer. However, I would like to comment on your analysis of the election trends. Our position is that we see a different situation. In other words, I ran for the previous Tokyo gubernatorial election a little over a year ago, and the reaction that I have felt at that time from the people is very, very different from the reaction that I'm seeing today. In other words, the reaction that I'm getting from the citizens this time is much more positive. In other words, our team feels very strongly that we have a real possibility of winning. So I would like to just point out that we see the election trends differently.
Well, on this very positive note, we'll wrap it up. It's 4:30. We have a custom here to give an honorary membership, or a one-year honorary membership to all our guests. If we're lucky, our newest member is the future governor of Tokyo. We'll see. Please give a warm applause to thank Mr. Kenji Utsunomiya.